Okay, we're good. So I have 140, and we know you have a lot of choices for your day today, and you chose to be here, so we want to start on time, and we want to make the best use of your time. So we're going to go right ahead and start. My name is Tina Jordan. I'm the Vice President of Membership for FCA International, and I am very excited to welcome you to today's panel, Disruptive by Design, AI at Sea to Resist Future Threats. For those who may not know, FCA's emerging leaders are made up of our members who are aged 40 and under. But I want to stress that though our panelists today might be under the age of 40, they are here because of their expertise and their experience and the insights that they're going to share with you, and they just happen to be under the age of 40. We appreciate your time and your support for today's panel. You are in for a great session, as our emerging leaders always have a great perspective on AI, IT, and cyber. So to start, I'd like to introduce the moderator for today's panels, James McPherson. James recently accepted a position with the GAASI on the Marine Corps program team as Operations, Sustainment, and Training Program Manager, where he is managing USMC contractor logistics support and various other contracts. So I will turn it over to James. James will introduce the panelists and will moderate the panel. So please join me in a warm AFCEA welcome for James McPherson.
All right, thanks everybody, and let's get a round of applause for Tina. Thanks for doing this and letting us up here. I appreciate it. Okay, good afternoon everybody. Thanks for joining us in this panel. This is the Emerging Leaders Group, so a lot of us are new at this, to include myself. So we'll go ahead and get started. So I just want to introduce everybody here. Down there at the end we have Lieutenant Commander Shane Holton, Assistant Intelligence Officer aboard USS Carl Vinson, my favorite ship. I think it's America's favorite ship as well. He's also served with Chief of Naval Operations as a Digital Warfare Officer and the Requirements Officer for Navy's Artificial Intelligence Development Environment. Yeah, we'll go ahead and move along here to Eddie Storm. All right, hey Eddie. Eddie is our Senior Solutions Architect with Elastic. He brings a wealth of experience with an intersection of analytics, observability, machine learning. He did 7 years in the Navy, and now he's taking leadership roles with data engineering, with DevSecOps, and supporting analytics. Probably one of the smartest guys I met here today, so thanks for joining us, Eddie. Then we have Mike Carl Bloom. He's our Senior Account Executive from NVIDIA. Also another Navy guy. I think this is just the Navy panel up here. Mike stays incredibly busy with all things cyber, AI, and other emerging technologies. All right, so yeah, so I am General Atomics. I'm a MQ-9 guy. I've been working at MQ-9 for 10 or so years, and we are, if you guys know anything about MQ-9, ISR is our big thing. For about a decade or so, we've been flying around collecting ISR information in CENTCOM. And what we've seen with that is like although the system is unmanned, the amount of data that we are able to collect from sensors and imagery is very manpower intensive. The more sensors that we get, the more people it takes to look through them to ensure that what we're looking for is what we're finding. So this topic, although I'm no expert in AI by any means, is very near and dear to my heart because this is what our people on the ground really need, is some sort of labor reduction. So with 20 years in CENTCOM, now in the rear view, and we're taking a pivot to the Pacific or over to Indo-PACOM, we have a different problem set at least for ISR collection. So previously, we were operating in somewhat of an uncontested environment, if you will, for aircraft. And we heavily relied on the concept of, little plane, big sky. Now we're facing a whole different problem set where we have little plane, giant ocean, hostile habitat, and really high stakes. So with this peer competitor, at least my platform has some growing to do. With that being said, we're looking to leverage teaming, as everybody around here is talking about teaming. So it's no longer just the lone asset, Overwatch, doing what it needs to do. We need eyes in the sky, we need eyes on the ground, we need eyes underwater and on surface. And to do that, it's going to take an immense amount of data processing and hopefully not a ton of people. With recruiting challenges, and labor shortages, we really need a machine learning or AI type tool to help us parse through this work and automate. I mean, that's what GA got into this business before, was really to the 4Ds of robotics. You know, things that are dumb, dull, dangerous, and dirty. Now we're taking it to another level, which is just immensely difficult. So I hope we get to some of that here today. Yeah. So that, how do we do this? How do we do this as a service, as a C service, to leverage and to design AI solutions to at sea to resist threats? So I'll open that wide open question to anybody on the panel here if they want to comment as to how we take existing AI solutions that are already out there and start merging them with various types of air, surface, and undersea assets.
I can take a stab at it. So I work for Elastic. I'm not going to sing high praises of Elastic too much or focus on the product today, so I'll just speak in general terms. I think the quickest way to get AI capabilities to this kind of data is for that to be included in our products. And we see this trend, right? We see machine learning is increasingly being included into things like, you know, your SQL databases. It's now just bundled in. You can utilize some of those simple functions. And I think this is really the way that is practically possible to do AI and ML in the Navy and DoD at large, is because solutions that require complex software engineering are just a non-starter in my experience. So it's going to be these baked-in capabilities, just being smarter about using those. So I'll give you one non-specific example of machine learning AI. It does not require complex accelerated computer or anything like that, and that is anomaly detection, right? So Elastic as a platform bakes it in. Lots of other systems bake some kind of anomaly detection, and one of the great ways that can be used on any existing data is, so we are collecting all the data, but the question comes, well, what data should we be looking at? Because at the end of the day, the problems are complex, and we need analysts to actually, you know, do what they're good at and figure out exactly if this is something good or this is something bad. But anomaly detection is a great, like, non-specific use of machine learning to get the eyes of your analysts onto that data that they should be spending their time on, right? Because you're going to be collecting way more data than you could do anything about. And I think things like anomaly detection, things that are already built into your tools and databases, are going to be some of the first best ways for us to field machine learning in the Navy.
Very good. Thank you, Eddie. I mean, I guess all that being said, Eddie, what kind of technologies and trends in DoD AI ops are you particularly excited about?
So I'm excited about a lot of things. By the show of hands, how many people have put their hands on something like ChatGPT? Awesome. So everybody sees what's happening, right? It's like the first time that we can all feel like, you know, something is in the air, right? Because the buzzwords have been around this problem space for years, right? Everybody wanted to sell things. Nobody was sure if it was worth buying, and they're probably right. But I am excited to see how we can apply actual things such as, you know, what ChatGPT does to further improve this problem of how do we get the eyes of our analysts onto the data that needs looking at. And I think it's going to be like an evolution of anomaly detection, but much better, right? We will actually be able to surface, we're not going to replace our analysts, I don't think, but we're going to use technologies like that to basically put anomaly detection on steroids and surface things out of these data streams that are worth looking at. That's what I'm personally excited for.
If I could just piggyback on that. So I'm an
Please.
Intel officer by training, and the potential to use ChatGPT in the information operations space, not just in the traditional intelligence analysis and exploitation dissemination, but to actually use it to generate I/O is a huge space that multiple governments and militaries are going to be playing in. But the idea that you could generate an information operation for a particular target automatically and with variety built in there, that's entirely new, right? It takes the marginal cost of targeting one more member, one more person with this kind of effect to zero, because you're just pressing generate the next one, these small caveats. Whereas it used to be a full-time shop. You know, that, in a lot of ways, what I think we're seeing with ChatGPT is the white-collar part of our jobs are going to increasingly be hopefully supplemented, but at some point challenged by the existence of these very smart chatbots. And I think we're going to feel that in DoD as much as they're going to see it in industry, right? Which is, if your job is to summarize and write a report, as most of intelligence jobs are right now, then that's going to be challenged, I think, by having a ChatGPT-like organization. Now, there's going to be some barriers, whether these things exist on classified systems or not, but you can clearly see the implication for the future of our workforce. So I'm excited, but also a little terrified by that as well.
Speaking of being terrified, I play around with ChatGPT, and I know that it learns every time that we interact with it, and I'm sure that many other these machine learning and AI type tools do the same thing. How do we, as an industry and a DoD community, ensure that our tools that we're going to acquire and use to take action, how do we ensure that they're consuming the right information to be authoritative instead of, I guess, influence to give false positives or give us poor direction?
So one of the reasons I'm up here today is that we've got a initiative on board Carl Vinson called Data Science at Sea, and part of the work we're doing is curating existing data feeds, bringing information that's typically delivered through different programs of record into unique combinations to meet warfighter requirements. So the question of data curation, data accuracy, verification has been really central to our effort. And I'll tell you, it's a full-time job, right? In a lot of ways, I see the traditional intelligence officer or intelligence specialist role in a AI-powered future to be much more in the data curation and engineering space. Because if you're curating and engineering and you've got these AI systems, as long as it's good in, it can be good out. And you don't have to put people on the far side of the analysis as much as you do ensuring that these systems are being fed properly on a diet of authoritative, verified data sets. So I do think that at the moment, we don't do a great job, and I could talk at length about this topic, but we don't do a great job in the manning and training of everything from data science through to AI ML in uniform. Now, it's different on the civilian side, and obviously industry has a lot of talent, but in uniform, we don't do that at all. We don't train people to be data scientists or even to be analysts beyond a certain level. It's more like information analysts, less data analysts. However, we're going to have to move there because we're living in this big data world now. Increasingly, artificial intelligence is a big part of our mission, our job, and our systems. But ultimately, it's probably going to be uniformed personnel who have to do the curation at the tactical edge, particularly for Navy, where we're expecting to operate in denied environments where even if the contractor support or the industry support is willing to reach forward and help us at the edge, we might not have the comms pathways to enable that communication forward. So we've got to train our people up in-house. So I do think the Navy would be wise to invest in data science training. And I know that, for example, the Chief Data Analytics Office, CDAO, has invested in a little bit of this at the Joint Staff, which is great. But I'd love to see Navy in particular take the lead on the services data science training, even if it's just the basic level of curation, authoritative sources, and how one goes about training these algorithms. It's been happening throughout DoD in a scattered way since about 2015 with Project Maven, but we need to take a much more concerted man-train approach to this.
In a denied environment, do you think that uniformed sailors would be alone and unafraid, be able to curate this data? I mean, given the current recruiting climate?
We make a whole bunch of stuff work in a denied environment that you normally would think requires a degree of shoreside support, whether it's aircraft maintenance or complicated maintenance of any sort, logistics operations. We'll make it work. I would prefer that we were better trained
Yeah.
in advance, so we didn't have to have that steep learning curve the first time that we're actually in a denied environment and completely unable to reach back. And that's about training and putting the people with the skill sets forward for Navy. Now, it's a little different for the rest of DoD. Different services have different requirements, but for us, the message that we're getting from senior naval leadership is be prepared to do all your jobs in a denied comms environment where you are maintaining strict emission control and you are operating silently. That's what we're hearing. That has implications for what we can expect from industry support with artificial intelligence. And also, if your AI solution or your industry solution requires that program to talk back to a shore site to be refined or improved, I don't think we can guarantee that's likely to happen in a challenging environment. And the last thing we want to do is become dependent on capabilities that when the comms go away, the capability performance drops way off, and we've been relying on it. So I would say for Navy customers in particular, I hope industry is thinking through doing all this in a denied environment. And I think that's going to include front-loading stuff at the tactical edge. Really, that's probably the big thing. But I've been talking for enough. I want to hear from Mike. What do you about what NVIDIA
Let's
is
talk to
doing?
Mike. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, Mike. Mike, in your role, you interact with a wide range of Navy customers that have various use cases. What are some of the trends that you've seen for these various applications of AI?
Okay. Yeah. So not only in the Navy, but I would say in the DoD in general, there's probably 4 top use cases that I see. So unmanned autonomous systems. So things from not only how you do navigation control, but looking at like route planning, object detection avoidance, and control of the speed and direction of the vessel overall, right? And then second to that would be the use of digital twins. So I've seen a really huge uptick in that, especially when it comes into simulating real-world, kind of like physically accurate, photorealistic environments that replicate the environments that all these unmanned platforms are going to operate in, and being able to prepare them for a real-world deployment overall. In addition to that, I would also say that then being able to take kind of the immersive AR, VR, MR experience and adding that into the digital twin is something I've seen the Navy in particular go after. Cybersecurity, so that's another big one, obviously, where AI lends itself really well. So not only from detecting threats at the endpoint or in network traffic, but automating operations in the Security Operations Center is a big one. And then in addition to that, using techniques like digital fingerprinting to do detection of insider, outsider threats. And then finally, I would say sensor processing. So looking at computer vision, radar, sonar data, and bringing all that together for ISR purposes.
Okay. So just to be clear here, most of my knowledge on machine learning is artificial. My intelligence is artificial here. So help me understand, what is the digital twin, and what is that? How is that important to what you guys are doing?
Yeah, you want me to start with that?
Yes,
okay,
please.
Cool, yeah, sounds good. Yeah, so I think there's really 2 large benefits from the digital twin, right? So as I explained, it's this photorealistic, like virtual world that replicates the actual physical world that we're in. And so the first of those is helping you to build trust in autonomy. So being able to iterate and experiment in the real world is obviously costly, right? And so it's something that you wouldn't be able to replicate as well. So if you do that in a digital twin, it lends itself really well for that. The second one, like I mentioned, is the cost savings aspect of it. So it's really prohibitive to try to do all of that operationally, especially when you're looking at like taking USVs out to try to train them for autonomous operations, right, or a UUV. And so there's actually a great showcase of that in the WWT booth where Naval Undersea Warfare Center Keyport took a digital twin tool and they're using it to train unmanned underwater vessels in the littoral space. And so they mapped out the ocean floor, created a replica of a UUV, and they're loading in acoustic data as well so that they can determine routes for sending UUVs autonomously in the littoral zone. So I think that's just kind of a highlight of looking across the board in the UXV realm of how digital twins can be beneficial.
Okay. I think I understand.
Yeah.
So thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. So I guess I'm kind of in the dark about UUVs since I'm a UAV guy. with AI and ML, you know, and maybe that's on purpose, right? We don't want to talk a lot about this, but if the value of UUVs and what they're about to get into, how comfortable we are with today's technology about just letting those things rip and snoop around.
How comfortable is the Navy with
Yes.
UUVs?
Yeah.
I mean, we've been pioneering UUVs, for 40, 50 years now. It's actually been a part of the Navy portfolio for a long time. Definitely a renewed interest in it now as the autonomy technology gets better. UUVs have a couple of advantages over, for example, unmanned surface vehicles. Being under the water obviously defeats some detection, not all. They can get in closer. They can support things like special warfare missions. They do provide a lot of value to the meteorological community, for example, regarding ISR and environmental data. Having a long endurance UUV that can gather up bathymetric or oceanography data, super useful. And obviously, because the Navy is particularly concerned with choke points, you want to have an in-water endurance capability in vital regions like choke points throughout the globe. UUVs get you there a lot easier than having a submarine or having some other sensor system that's shore-based, for example. If you think about the model for ASW that the Navy's had during the Cold War, right, we had the fixed arrays. And in a lot of ways, the Navy moved away from that after the Cold War. And so instead of having a fixed array of sonar, we now have a more flexible, distributed, reprogrammable ASW capability, and UUVs are a huge part of that, right? Having a distributed sensor network to do the ASW mission. In terms of the comfort level, yeah, I think we are not only, I don't want to say the Navy's a leader in any AI technology, that's probably overselling it a bit, but I will say that there's a lot of foundational research, 70s, 80s to today, that organizations like NRL and ONR have done in the UUV space. In the undersea domain in general. So I will say that, yeah, I think generally we're pretty comfortable with this. I think you might actually see more full autonomy in UUVs. This is not an official position of the Navy or the Defense Department. This is an opinion that you'll probably see more in the way of full autonomy in that domain than you see it anywhere else, to include the sky, I think.
Oh yeah, big time.
Definitely.
Yeah. No, people are terrified about having unmanned aircraft being unpiloted all over the place, and I get it. I feel the same way sometimes, but it's interesting that we're willing to let UUVs continue to go on undetected. But I guess you're not going to crash into someone's house, so that's probably
No, but if you hit a cargo ship, that can be pretty disruptive.
that'd be a little embarrassing.
Can I ask you an ISR question? Because it's kind of topical in the news. I feel like no one's going to ask you questions. I feel bad. So obviously,
sign. Yeah.
with the Chinese balloon, right? Obviously, violation of territorial airspace and all this. But at the end of the day, we're talking about a surveillance system, right? An unmanned ISR system.
Sure.
And clearly, we now have a position in the Defense Department to ensure that those do not collect anywhere near the U.S., right?
Yeah.
Being proactive on that. As someone working in the unmanned ISR space, is there implications for your systems if this is reciprocated on the Chinese side?
So anytime we have a non-compliant thing in the sky, whether it's a Chinese balloon or a guy with a weather balloon strapped to his lawn chair, that becomes problematic, right? Because our most UAVs, unmanned aircraft, currently do not have what the FAA refers to as due regard, right? And really, for the folks who don't know what that means, it's the ability to do this, right? Like look around. They're hyper-focused either on the ground, in the sky, or they're flying straight. So when we have things that are like balloons that aren't squawking, or just a flock of geese, also problematic. Now with them being an enemy combatant, if you will, that complicates things even further. With our current understanding of these super cool balloons, probably not a huge threat to what we currently have on tap. But it is, from where you're coming from, a reciprocation standpoint, things are unmanned to be attritable, right? So if we're going to send people into places that are dangerous, we wouldn't if we could send something without a person in it. So depending how Froggy, our not so good friends get, I think that's probably okay.
Okay.
I hope I said almost nothing. So yeah.
Well, I was just thinking, I was like, well, if it's unmanned ISR and
Yeah.
our policy is to shoot it down, and the Chinese take the same approach, I mean, it just becomes, it's a complicated question for us.
Yeah, yeah, and that's why I'm like little plane, big sky, right? So if we're way up there, no one's really looking for us, just like these balloons, we usually do fine, right? But if people are looking for you, all of a sudden an F-22 shows up with a AIM-9 attached to it. so-
J-22, probably.
Yeah, probably, yeah.
J-22, They're not an AIML question, but yeah. Thanks.
Our capacity to look at things we didn't look at before is kind of also increasing with these tools, right? So before, let's say you're thinking about like radar data, right? Typically, a blip you might not pay attention to, but let's say you start using more anomaly detection in your data stream, right? That gives you that additional signal to the operator to be like, hey, I know you don't typically pay attention to blips, but this is anomalous because I've looked at other blips before that we did nothing about, and like this one is of a different nature. So it gives a person a chance to go, So I think we're going to be going, quite a bit more. We're going to start noticing things we haven't noticed before. It's like with the Chinese balloon, right? We weren't looking until it was just obvious to the naked eye, and then we started looking, and then in 3 days, just boom, boom, boom. And people are like, what's happening? The sky is falling. No, the sky is not falling. We just started looking.
Yeah, it's like if you ever bring a black light to a hotel room, you'll never bring that black light again.
Just don't.
Yeah, the fallacy of vividness, right?
Yeah.
It's like you see it, and then all of a sudden it's everything, right?
Yeah, it's everywhere. So now, since we got the black light on, I think we're hoping to get some AI to help us determine what we should be concerned about. And that's really what your point is, right? So, but there's so many little dots all over my hotel room, so we need some help. And hopefully we can get some machine learning to source between what's good and what's just dust.
Yes.
Right? Okay. All right. Okay, so moving on. So back to Eddie here. Data engineering, acquisition, and cleaning is often 80% of what the effort is involved in data science and machine learning. What's your perspective on these challenges, and what improvements should the DoD be making?
So this is a simple one. The improvement is to start doing it in the first place. Like, yeah. I think it's actually one of those low-hanging fruit that this is something that DoD can do without waiting for the AI to arrive to it, because for AI to be born, it needs good data. So we do, in routine course of business, all kinds of things, but we just don't enter them into the systems that can later help us train models, right? So I think that the best thing we can do is to start paying attention to just routine things. For example, aircraft maintenance. So you're collecting any number of data points, and then you have an inspection, and then you note that certain things are broken or not. So you can take all this data that was collected during, the flight, and then you can add as kind of the judgments of the technicians can be formally annotated as part of that data set, right? So we do this anyway. What we don't do is we don't write it down and save it for later. So I think that if we start doing that, that is going to materially affect our capability to later automate those systems or field AI against them.
Yeah. Can I just add to that? Because that's an absolutely great point. And I've been coming to FCS for a while, and I remember in 2016, 2017, when the Navy first started talking about they wanted to incorporate artificial intelligence, right? There was a line that was going around senior naval leadership where we have the data, we just need smart people to come from industry with the algorithms to give us the artificial intelligence. And those of us who were maybe a little lower down the food chain would have debated the premise that the Navy had ready, cleaned up data sets for automation. That just wasn't the case. And Navy leadership backed away from that language, and now we have much more of humility and awareness that we need to do our part in terms of the data cleaning to prepare for industry to come in, and that we can give you guys good data sets so that you can build on top of them. But the idea that the Navy had it in 2016, 2017, except in very narrow cases, generally not the case. I'll just give you an example. I mean, if you think about, we talk about anomaly detection, but if you think about any sort of intelligence collection, you are looking only for anomalies. Whereas if you're training a machine learning algorithm, obviously you want it to detect anomalies, but the way you go about training it is to feed it 1,000 bits of non-anomalous behavior so it can find the one anomaly. We did not prioritize as an intelligence community the collection of non-anomalous behavior. And so when we first started trying to train AI ML systems, we realized that we had to go and collect fairly what we thought was basic, not important information in order to train the algorithm to detect the one anomaly, right? And that's something that we had to learn the hard way. And I think we're much better now. But it is great to hear the emphasis still on the data work that needs to precede any hope of machine learning or artificial intelligence solutions. And I think that's as much a responsibility on DoD and the service as it is on industry. We can't ask you guys to show up with just a problem, not provide you any data, and then just say, oh, can you make this AI in 6 months? Like, that's insane. And we too often have those kind of conversations with industry, so I apologize on behalf of the
It's
service.
okay.
To anyone who's been stuck in that meeting.
And I think, Commander, too, it goes back to your point earlier of the need for the training element, right? To build those knowledge, skills, and abilities in the workforce so that they understand how to actually do the data curation piece. It's so important.
Yeah, it's funny on the civilian side, because I see some folks that we've worked with here, and if you look at the Navy civilian side, so out of the warfare centers, for example, they have the ability to directly hire data scientists. With that skill set, they can apply for that, put out an application for that job and all that, and they'll get people coming in. And that's Navy civilian, so they're still working for the government directly, and they're working for Navy. There's just no equivalent in uniform, and that's the real challenge. And we do get great work out of the warfare centers from that civilian workforce. We've got one actually embedded on board Carl Vinson right now, which is fantastic. But we need to scale that broadly across a much bigger swath of officer and enlisted designators and rates.
That's a good point. Coming from an aircraft perspective, I think for the longest time we were looking for like prognostics, like what's going to break next, and determining this normalized data set and actually capturing when things break and being able to feed the machine to tell us, hey, you probably want to buy 10 more of these radars because they're going to break when you go out to sea. It's something that I think, at least from my perspective, has been a kind of a struggle, just getting that data set. There's a lot of tools out there that'll feed you, go do this thing to increase your A sub O. But if you don't have that underlying data set that's been captured, collected by folks in uniform, we just got a cool tool that makes fun noises and it doesn't really do anything. So I think that particular piece of data is, that normal data is equally as important as this like extraordinary or data that's different than what we're used to.
Yeah, exactly. If you're it's like an all sugar diet. You can't do it, right? Yeah, you need to feed algorithms a balanced mix.
Yeah. To put also a cyber spin on it, right? Cybersecurity, same problem, really. Most of what we do in terms of threat hunting is guided by the kind of data that is available to the analysts to do their activities. So if they started to have this additional data that maybe it's not used for machine learning, but it's still helps you see where the anomalies are happening, other things like that, so that it empowers the cybersecurity program as well. It helps them to flag like strange behavior or anomalies with equipment and other things like that. So it's like it's a virtuous relationship, not just for AI, whatever that may be used for, but also for security.
Cyber security terrifies me for many reasons, mostly because I watch too many movies. But in the intelligence collection world, we do a lot to determine pattern of life. Is that something that we do in the cyber realm?
Most definitely. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, there is. Yeah. So unsupervised machine learning anomaly detection, right? It looks at it builds on a pattern of life. So generally in the cyber world, they build about a 30 to 45 day corpus of looking at what that pattern is. And then a lot of that's tied into the piece I mentioned before on UEBA, right? So doing the behavioral analytics, looking at users and trying to map them with their peers and the peer groups, and then saying from that, okay, where's the anomalous behavior in there? So yeah, most definitely a pattern of life is a part of that.
Okay. Michael, while you got the microphone here, can you give me an example of some of the benefits performing AI at the edge versus at the data center?
Yeah, for sure. So the first I would say is getting you real-time insights into your data. So the closer that you can actually process at the edge where the sensor data is, the sooner you're going to get access to that and be able to give that local commander there the decision advantage that they need. So that's the first one. The second one I would say would be looking at cost savings. So rather than trying to take all that data and then send that back to your data center, whether it's on-prem or in the cloud, and then run your analysis on it at that point, you're able to do that at the edge and kind of filter out what it is that you want from that, and then send back a subset of that data. And then the third really ties into what the commander brought up before about DDIL, right? So looking at denied, degraded, intermittent, or latent environments, and resiliency in the system. So when you look at things where you're in those states with reduced comms and you don't have that pathway back to your regional NOC, to where you need that processing power, being able to have that compute locally at the edge really will give them the advantage.
I'll just add one more to that. I think that doing any AI/ML or even data science, like we're doing with data science at sea, at the tactical edge as opposed to back on a shore site. Just briefly, if you're trying to do data science at sea, it's actually a terrible environment to do it. Your computers are slow. You don't generally have trained personnel, but if you do, they got 3 or 4 different jobs, so it's largely a collateral duty. You have issues with bandwidth and comms when you're not actually actively restricting your comms. So the question is, why would you ever want to do this at the tactical edge, right? Based on all those limitations. And the answer for us has been, that's the closest you can get to the real operational challenges. So your understanding of operator requirements is almost instantaneous. You can change something, you can collect features you'd like to add in real time, make those changes, and then go back to the warfighter or whoever and say, hey, we made this change, is this better? And you can find that out within a day. Whereas if you're working from a shore site, particularly in a DDL environment, that OODA loop can take weeks, right? Even with the best intentions that everyone's trying to support this, moving this capability forward is, in my mind, really about how quickly can we understand and address specific warfighter requirements. In addition to all the great stuff Mike added as well. But I would just say that's why we're trying to do data science at sea, even though it is, in many respects, the absolute worst place to do it. Even within Navy, doing it on a ship is much harder than doing it at a warfare center. So.
I guess with all that being said, Mike, and maybe Commander, you can add on, does that mean we shouldn't do this in data centers, or should we?
No, you have to do it everywhere, because I think the best you'll ever be able to generate at the tactical edge from scratch would be minimum viable products. So you need to have, for Navy, and this isn't true for all the services, but for Navy, the model for us and the Data Science at Sea initiative has basically been create the minimum viable products forward based on operational requirements, then work with shoreside partners to transition those minimum viable products back to shore sites. At the same time, we're receiving support in the way of, hey, if this data set's hard to get or whatever else, back in the data centers that we're working with, it's the fleets or the warfare centers or wherever, so it can become a conversation that works, and then we're doing the cutting edge stuff, and they're cleaning up, standardizing, and then pushing back out to other fleet units from the shore center. That's the model that works for us. So everyone has to be doing this at every levels, but I think the divisional labor is a little different, because I think industry, and this is true all the way through DoD, I think we sort of believe we understand the requirements sitting in the Pentagon. I was a requirements officer. So at one point, people came to me and said, what does the fleet need? And I said, well, fleet's not my phone. I'm just going to talk to a couple people. We'll do a couple summits, and we'll try to figure it out. But at a certain point, it was my job to write down what I thought the fleet needed, and that would generate the requirement. But if you're actually moving the development of this capability to tactical edge, that's where you can know for sure if you've got it, or if someone comes back in and says, that thing you did, absolutely useless waste of my time. And it's great to hear that fast, because you can fail fast and you can learn, as opposed to waiting 6 months. And that lag is sadly a constant with many military systems. We define the requirements, we go to production, we go to industry, we get a solution gets delivered, solution gets cyber hardened, that takes another stretch of time, right? Although I will say that Navy's gotten better at the DevSecOps thing. We're seeing that across Navy now. So software development is no longer this god-awful waterfall process. It's getting a lot more real-time with the AT. It's getting better. You got to admit, it's getting better. It's not great. It's getting better.
It's getting there.
It's getting there. But what really has not changed is the requirements part of that, which is still the longest chunk of this in my mind, but we're trying to shrink that down. So that is why, yes, at the tactical edge, yes, at the fleet level, it's really got to be a whole of fleet approach.
Just to piggyback on that, there is a way to pay some of this forward in terms of being able to serve pretty impressive AI models out at the edge and not having to have a lot of hardware to like train them and stuff like that. So transfer learning, right? I don't have any good examples in mind, but I'm kind of optimistic on that note that we'll actually be able to have some program where we train something that requires much more hardware ashore, and then it can be fine-tuned continuously once it's deployed on ship. And I think that's probably how we want to do it anyway, because I don't think we're ever going to, in my lifetime, live in a world where we have actual like full software engineering teams at the edge to do like more complex type of integration.
I agree, yeah.
Yeah, I would agree. I would say the majority of the training side of it within AI would be done within the data center, and all the inferencing would be done at the actual edge. And then you can take whatever data from the inferencing and bring that back into the data center to further refine the model and get accuracy within the model. But I don't think, I mean, maybe you could put a full rack of, you know, AI servers on the Carl Vinson with the commander, right? If you have the right folks on there, they're able to do this. But it wouldn't make sense. I think it's more efficient to do this in the warfare centers, like you mentioned, and then do all the inferencing at the edge.
Do you guys think like emerging technology, like what we're seeing with Pelio, connecting these dots together will help accelerate the development of AI and ML that's actually useful today?
Yeah, I agree. And Navy's got all the pieces. We just haven't pulled it together into a single repeatable ConOps yet. But I feel like we're getting close. But yeah, between the civilian uniform side, we're all moving in roughly the same direction, but you need to tie it together with that supporting mission requirements. Otherwise, it's just a science project. You know, you have to point to something that you're measurably improving performance on, and then you can say, yeah, we couldn't have done this without the AI ML solution. You know, the first thing whenever we have a new project we're considering is, have we considered whether we can just do this smarter without some sort of data science solution, right? Is there just a training opportunity? Because, you know, there can be quick fixes that are short of AI ML that are still worth pursuing.
Sure.
And we need to sort of shepherd the scarce resource that is the people we have on board who are actually trained. So I need to make sure with the project management part of it that they're only pursuing stuff that actually matters. So.
Very good. Okay. Commander, we have a question from you still here. Digital warfare officer still is true. Is AI/ML talent gap really in middle management?
Yeah, so when I was at Digital Warfare Office and I see some colleagues from that endeavor out in the audience, and I just want to wave to everybody, we were looking at data science workforce, what we would need across the uniform and civilian side. This was back in 2017, 2018. And what we were finding was in junior personnel, we are getting a workforce now in uniform that comes into the service, no matter what job they're doing, if they're officer and enlisted, they might have coding experience. They might have AI/ML proficiency. So you get relatively junior folks, junior enlisted or junior officers with that background. And they may end up in a job where that's relevant. For example, the IT professions and some of our officer warfare communities. And so the junior personnel have it. And then you go up to the senior level, so we're talking about admirals here. I have never met an admiral who did not want to be the admiral who was leading the AI effort. They all want to lead the AI effort. I've never met the admiral who's like, I don't want it. Get it out of here. No, no, no. They all want to be the guy who is historically, or girl, who is historically associated with AI in the Navy, right? So a lot of enthusiasm at the top, a lot of capability bubbling up at the bottom, even though the Navy's not doing a good job of skill tracking, but these people do show up. In the middle, though, and I am now in the middle, and I am in this boat myself, there is not a proficiency in not just coding, but project management, right? As more of our systems and more of our capabilities are being informed by or contain some degree of machine learning, artificial intelligence, we don't really have a middle management workforce that can manage that effectively. Because really what middle management is it's about the allocation of resources downward and the management of expectations up. That's middle management, right?
That's my life, yes.
But yeah, it's a lot of us are in that space, I think. But in my experience, you need to know a little bit about how AI, ML, or even just data science works so you can understand if this project will do better if you give it more budget money, or this project needs 5 more people, or so that sort of higher level programmatic management, which is really all you're supposed to be doing in the 0405 space. If you're in the Pentagon, for example, we don't have those people for AI/ML. So the junior people, we're going to get them. They're going to keep joining up, and that's wonderful. Senior level leadership's going to still want to do AI. I don't think that's going away. Middle management is in critical need, I think, of a mid-career education in how to manage programs with some aspect of AI/ML or just basic data science. So,
I guess with all that being said, we do have a workforce shortage. We don't have the labor either in uniform or on the civilian side. Do we think that we can use AI to augment or even replace some of the functions that we have been relying on human beings to do?
I have thoughts on this, but I've been talking a lot. I'd like to kick this over to you gentlemen. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes. No, well, going back to the whole deal with ChatGPT, good part of the room has had their hands on it, so it probably, you will believe me when I say that, I can see some, pencil pushing functions that can be better automated. There's no need, right? Certain things such as summarizing content that can be streamlined. Maybe what it looks like is not elimination of job categories, but resizing, giving one person a lot more leverage. So that's how I think of it.
Yeah, and I would also agree. I think it's definitely something that will augment, not necessarily replace the workforce. So use cybersecurity for an example. There's a lot of tasks in that can be automated, especially when you're trying to find threats rather than going through alert triage and whatnot that security analysts have to go through. If you could just automate the majority of that and then highlight to them, hey, these are the threats that you need to pay attention to, I think allowing the workforce to necessarily repurpose what they're doing day to day is the key, and that's really, I think, where AI will augment them. How about?
If you guys could figure out how to automate my expense reports, I would be elated, because that is the bane of my existence.
Can I just add one thing to that? If you look at finance, so just big finance, banking, and all that stuff, what it looked like in the late 80s, early 90s, still very manpower intensive. Still a lot of guys on trading floors, calling stuff out, typing at computers or early Bloomberg machines. You go to a financial trading center now, it is a ghost town by comparison, because a lot of those basic functions that used to be human processes have been automated, both as a cost savings, but also because those fully automated firms were making decisions faster than some of the more manpower-heavy enterprises. So that's a lot of hedge funds, everything else. If you look at the intelligence community by comparison, I've been in naval intelligence for 18 years. Our workforce has grown every year that I have been in, with one little blip around 2008, 2009, post-financial crisis, where it drops off a bit. We have continued to expand the pool of people, which means something's breaking down there, and DoD particularly intelligence, but I'll say DoD in general, may be resistant to the workforce streamlining benefits you would expect to see from AI, ML, and automation. We're just weirdly resistant to it. We don't seem to ever go down. There's more people in uniform doing this job now than there was when I started, but every trend would seem to indicate we should be getting efficiencies and be able to automate some of these basic tasks. We're just not there yet. In fact, it gets bigger, seemingly. So, yeah, it's counterintuitive, but that's been my experience.
You know, I see the same thing in unmanned aviation. No offense to all my pilot friends, but anytime we try to automate something, my decision maker is a pilot. He's like, taking my job, man. But really, I'm trying to make your job easier, right? Or less of you. But to your point, we do see these forces continue to grow, even though things should be getting less intense.
I mean, has the Air Force shrunk since you guys introduced unmanned systems?
Does the Air Force ever shrink?
No, exactly. Well, that's what I'm saying. It's
Yeah.
like, well, now we have all these robots. We don't need people, right? No, that's not true. I
Yeah.
mean, it's an interesting study where we're moving almost the exact opposite direction that basic economic theory would tell you in terms of the marginal cost of labor. We're like, what if they just added more people and had AI? Like, okay, I guess. But I think they wanted to do.
Oh, we're almost out of time. Do we have a question from the group here? Yeah.
Apparently it's on. Okay. So I am by no means an expert in data, but I did recently read a book about AI-enabled operating models, so I feel at least somewhat qualified to ask this question. So one of the challenges that I definitely see, and because I mostly support the Army, is that there's a ton of different systems, a ton of different servers, a ton of different deployments, and all of that data is siloed into each one of those separate things. So we can talk about data silos all day long, but then the silo gets even more complicated when you talk about initiatives like JADC2 and how everybody's supposed to be in this big kumbaya environment. Now, clearly, we're not going to be able to fully do that because there's so many organizational and doctrine things in the way of that. And I know you guys briefly spoke to how you scope some of these efforts, but I'd actually really like to know if you think that the biggest challenges are the doctrine and changing the organization and the culture to be willing to expose data so that you can actually collect it all, normalize it, and then really be able to use AI ML on top of it. And I have another question after that too, but go ahead and do that.
Let's have you stick with just that one question because we're on really short time. And we
Okay.
have 3 other people we want to
Okay,
get, and we're
I
going to
have
have a speed round of answers. So let's go ahead and do the speed round of
Can I-
answers to her first question, and then we'll move to the next gentleman.
Okay, I'd like
Go
to
ahead.
actually ask a different question then.
Okay. Can you make it a real short question?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
So the question I'd actually rather ask, if we're really short on time, is you guys didn't really talk about how data algorithms can have biases. There's been several studies where you implement an algorithm, and then after it's been working and working and working, it actually ends up developing like bad biases. So please, can you speak to that?
And then we'll have you stick around, and they can do your first question afterwards. Perfect.
Sure. I can do both real quick. So I'd say the one way to overcome data siloing that I've seen is to have a tight focus on mission. If you have an actual operational requirement that you are addressing, the siloing problems are much easier to overcome because everyone's focused on the mission. Left to their own devices, the silos will proliferate and get worse. You need to keep people focused on one goal that everyone's moving towards. That's how you do it. There's no other way. You can't do it through regulation. You can't just say, oh, no more silos, guys. Doesn't work. In terms of the biases, it's true. It's a factor of programming and a degree of human laziness, I think, where basically if you set it and forget it, over time, algorithms without curation can drift in directions that you don't want, right? We see that in loan applications, a lot of civilian law enforcement issues regarding algorithms. The way to get away from that is active human management with a trained workforce to catch those as they're appearing in real time. Because biases for military mean literally you might use lethal force on the wrong target, right? So there's obviously sociological, criminal justice definitions of bias, but for us, it can get very deadly very quickly.
Yep, I'll just tackle the bias part. So I think we are more cautious, more aware of bias right now because we have these automated system doing the learning and us relying on them more. But I think we as people have the same exact problem. It's like the classic problem of analysis, the proliferation of alerts, right? People get so many alerts that they just start ignoring certain things. They get used to, everybody I'm sure experienced this. You have a certain problem, you go to the doctor, doctor's used to treating, wet noses 99% of the time. You think you might have a real problem. It's like, unless you have a way to communicate to the doctor what should look at, you're gonna get out of there, with an ibuprofen prescription and some lozenges. It happens. I think we're more aware of it now. And I would actually end it on a positive note. The fact that we are relying more on these systems, it helps us systematically see that the bias happening, and we can actually do something about it. It's actually a lot harder to stomp out bias and address it in humans than it is in these systems. So I think it's actually getting better.
Okay, great. All right. And Mike already said he's going to skip this one so we can get the other. These are complex questions and complex answers, so I'm not sure we're going to get them done in 4 minutes, but we're going to try. Next.
So my question is from a developer standpoint and test. I mean, I'm thinking like you have X amount of sources you want to collect from. But what's the test coverage? What percentage do you have already of the data sets you need? And also, is there really a uniform way of reporting this? I mean, at the dev side, we think of XML, JSON, and structures that you can go gather them. But it seems to me like the structures may not even exist. And if they do, the coverage is very low. Can you speak to that, Commander, or someone else?
No, that's true. I think that it is incumbent on larger DoD units to invest in knowledge management to encompass data libraries for available sources. Because I agree, there's just basic knowledge management challenges that plague all large bureaucracies. DoD is no different. But we have a specific problem, which is when we're asked to produce a bulk amount of relevant data, we can take months to meet that requirement because we don't do enough of that in-house understanding of what's available to us. So that's a data literacy thing, but I really do think it should be an organizational requirement to maintain a library of your data sources local to you. But in my mind, that's an extension of the knowledge management problem.
Okay, great. Thank you. Let's go ahead.
I'm aware that on the USS Vincent or on some of these submarines, for example, you have limited physical space, so you can't put that many servers. So this is more general question about at the edge. You guys talked about the advantages of the edge, but one of the disadvantages is you don't have that quote compute power, right? Now, in a perfect world, you can put 3,000 servers or whatever, and then you have all the compute power you want, or something to that effect. But I kind of want to know what needs to be done. I mean, can we get to the point where that edge is powerful enough? I guess I'm asking, what are some things that can be done or are currently being done so that that edge can be a lot more powerful than it is now? So we can't, we're not going to have 10,000 servers, but is it algorithms? I mean, just from a technical standpoint.
I think NVIDIA has done more than any other organization to make that an operational reality at the tactical edge, just because your computers have enabled all of this.
I mean, there's chip geometry, obviously, but I mean, just other, whatever you can say.
Yeah, I think looking at ways that you can increase compute through GPU, parallel processing right at the edge, just you have anything you want to add on that?
Yep.
Beyond that? I mean,
So I'm looking at transfer learning and things like that as well, because that's going to help take some of the edge off of the edge, especially as pertains to training. And also, I think there is a wealth of machine learning that is much more classical machine learning, not like even the new stuff we're all excited about, that would tremendously improve the life of the Navy, but we're just not looking at it because it's not super sexy. And I think it's actually going to sneak in on the backs of, like SQL Server, other products that are going to be deployed in these environments. So kind of say, what can vendors do for their country? Put ML in your products so the DoD can get them on their ships and then actually start to be able to use them. And let them not deal with that problem separately, right? So.
Yeah, no, the most successful AI systems in the Navy today are not actually ML. They're expert systems. They are literally the Aegis combat system, which is just, they looked over the shoulder of an operator who's doing air defense and then created an algorithm with decision trees to replicate that person's thinking. These expert systems are still the backbone of most combat systems in DoD. ML is, I agree, we don't need ML solutions for everything. It is the new sexiness in the academic and commercial world, but we would be fine with some basic if-then statements that do not require the degree of computation. What they do require, though, is a degree of operator understanding what operators are actually doing, which again is an argument for operating at the edge, right? Because you really couldn't design something like Aegis without a close working relationship with the actual people who are doing the job.
Okay, great. So
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I know it's 2:40. We're going to do one more question. If you could just hang in there, we want to get the one more question in, and then a 30-second wrap-up.
I'm an Oracle DBA with FRC Southwest, and about 4 years ago, I helped extract data for working capital fund for the users were Washington DC or Pentagon, I believe. And my question is, if we're going to use ML tool, what tools can we use to make our we're doing corporate reporting services also for some flag officers every day.
Since I work for Elastic, I use Elastic. So the answer is use the tools that are doing the work of adding ML capabilities in them. So for example, Elastic, most of the Navy uses Elastic as a SIEM, so like a signals platform, and we provide anomaly detection. So that's my take on that.
Yeah.
I don't really have a dog in this race. I'm kind of solution agnostic, to be honest. I look to you guys in industry to provide that. So.
Okay.
Same with it.
Good. Good way to
I
finish
guess
up. Thank you.
What tool other than SQL script or BOE or SAP BI?
Yeah, so a lot of them are actually baked in now. So for example, if you're using the modern version of Microsoft SQL Server, you can use SQL queries with machine learning functions like as part of the query. And same thing if you're using Elastic, it's part of it already, so you can actually come into the interface and enable anomaly detection. So I think the tools that you have classically used, they can just do more now. And as long as you're willing to deploy the latest version of the tool, you're going to be pleasantly surprised to find those capabilities.
Great,
I know
great. So
because
thank you.
I extract the data for 3 days for working capital fund. If we can do that in 1 day, that would help.
Yeah.
Great. As I mentioned, complex questions with complex answers, so that was great. Let's give this panel a round of applause. James, thank you for moderating. Mike, Eddie, and Lieutenant Commander Halton, thank you very much. Thank you all for spending time with us. I know we have another group that's going to be coming in. If I could ask, there's a lot of interest in what you guys have to say, and I think there's still some more questions. So maybe what we could do is ask you to sort of just go back by the back table and just stand there, and people can continue to ask questions while we have the next group move in. So thank you again, everyone. Have a great FCA day and the rest of the week at West. Thank you.